In a time where nutrition information is often clouded with mixed messages and myths, having clarity based on solid information is more important than ever. Today's discussion centers around the intake of dairy and specifically how that impacts inflammation. There is a narrative out there that dairy produces or leads to inflammation in the body. So let's chat about it. We'll also tackle some other concerns about dairy. If all that sounds good to you, let's go. Hi folks, welcome to my channel or welcome back. My name is Kat. I'm a licensed registered dietitian nutritionist, and on this channel I like to talk about weight inclusive and weight neutral focused approaches to health, as well as diving into scammy and, in my opinion, unethical nutrition related businesses, products, mostly nutrition related MLMs, and other fear-mongering nutrition related claims. Now, dairy is a huge topic of debate. My goal with this video is to provide you with some information that you can then take. I really encourage people to have the informed choice around food rather than approach food with like fear. A lot of times just as humans, when we don't understand something, it's really easy to fall into kind of a fear of that thing. And we see this in so many aspects of life, but I see this so much because of the nature of what I do. I see this so much in nutrition, and definitely specifically in what we were talking about today, which is dairy. Now, a while back, I actually went through PubMed. Now, if you aren't familiar with PubMed, it is kind of like a Google for scholarly articles. It's from the National Library of Medicine. The National Institute of Health maintains the database. Great place to just kind of look around, but I put in the term dairy inflammation, looking for articles that were specifically talking about dairy and inflammation in humans. Now, there is a lot of information on the internet in general about how dairy is inflammatory, but I was having challenges with actually finding reputable sources for those claims. Now, when I was going through PubMed, specifically searching out dairy and inflammation, I found some really interesting studies, and so I want to talk about a few of them. Now, it's important to know that when we are looking for nutrition information, we can't just take studies that agree. That is cherry picking studies, right? Like, that is not in good faith. And so I really was trying to find sources about dairy being inflammatory. Now, what I did find about dairy being related to inflammation would be around people who had issues with the dairy proteins itself, like sensitivities to the proteins itself, or like allergies to the protein itself. Now, I do want to make a note that having a lactose intolerance, that is not the same thing. Lactose is the main carbohydrate in dairy, and all the foods that we're consuming are broken down by what is called enzymes. Those are specific proteins. Kind of think of them as like specific scissors or specialized scissors that go to different foods and like cut them, like to break them down. The specific enzyme for lactose is called lactase, and a lot of people, as they get older, the amount of lactase that their body produces goes down, and so sometimes people can have a lactase deficiency, and so their body is not able to break down that lactose. That is not the same kind of response. That is not the inflammation or like the allergy of the proteins itself in milk. That is technically called an intolerance instead. Someone can just choose to not have dairy at that point, or to have dairy that has had most or all of the lactose removed, or consume dairy with a lactase enzyme to help with the breakdown. An example would be like Lactaid. So that's kind of the summary of lactose intolerance specifically, not really what we're talking about in this video specifically regarding the concern around inflammation in dairy. Now, a lot of the papers that I was looking at, they were actually systematic reviews. They were looking at multiple different studies regarding milk and inflammation. Now, one of the ones I found was with 15 studies. Those were included in the systematic review, and they reported on healthy individuals and also other people with metabolic syndrome or type 2 diabetes. And what they found through all of those different studies in that systematic review was that the consumption of milk and dairy products did not show a pro-inflammatory effect in those subjects or in those people. The majority of the studies documented a significant anti-inflammatory effect in both of those kind of groups of people. So the people who had some of those like metabolic diseases, type 2 diabetes, and then the people who didn't. Although it's important to note, and just being fair here, not all of the articles were high quality. There were also no conflicts of interest in this. So this wasn't like a review from the Dairy Council. Now, this is also one that was interesting. The title of it is Dairy Products and Inflammation, a Review of the Clinical Evidence. And just kind of a summary, they established a new tool that was basically the quantitative evaluation to whether they're testing people and their response to dairy intake in regards to inflammation. And the review overall suggested that dairy products, particularly fermented products, have anti-inflammatory properties in humans not suffering from allergy to milk. So again, if you have an allergy to milk, Not recommended. Dairy intake is not what I'm going to encourage, of course, but if you don't have the allergy to milk, it does not mean that it's going to be inflammatory. In fact, there is research to suggest the anti-inflammatory effects on it. This one specifically talking about fermented products. And it's also important to note that the clinical relevance of the inflammatory markers is currently debated among researchers and regulatory authorities. So like the translations of those findings, they can still be clarified more. And just like with science in general, we're always like at the end, there's always that call for more information. The more evidence, the more information that we have to corroborate or to make sure that things aren't being taken out of context or cherry picked, anything like that. Like that's what we want to see. That's what we expect to see. Now, the next one is also a systematic review. And this review was looking at randomized controlled nutritional intervention studies. And what they found was that 3 out of the 7 studies that they were looking at, 3 out of those studies, they actually showed improvement in multiple inflammatory biomarkers. So like lab values, inflammatory markers, those were improved after dairy product consumption. But the 4 other studies didn't show any effects. So again, we're not, cherry picking, trying to find things that are just like pro dairy or whatever. Like we can also acknowledge the ones where it didn't have an effect. And then another interesting study, again, this one had no conflicts of interest. This one, the results suggested that short-term consumption of a combination of low and high-fat dairy products can be part of a healthy diet, as it has no adverse effects on inflammation. And I mentioned the short-term. They have to kind of say short-term because of the length of the study. That does not mean that they're saying short-term because it's only short-term. It's just that is dependent on the study and how long that was. Now, I'm not telling you to go out and buy milk or start buying dairy products and start consuming them. If you don't want to, that is okay. You can get all of your essential nutrients. You can get that without having dairy at all. At that same time, if somebody is looking for something that provides them a high quality amount, a lot of different nutrients, macronutrients and micronutrients at a generally like affordable kind of rate. And yes, I know grocery prices are wild right now, but like in general, compared to other foods of similar kind of nutritional density, dairy products are really a good amount for the cost. Like the ratio, the protein, the fat, the carbohydrate, and the micronutrients, there's a lot in there that can be really helpful for meeting nutrient needs for a lot of people. If you don't want to have it, that's okay. But my concern is that people who are kind of indifferent, or maybe they enjoy certain dairy foods or a variety of dairy foods, and they have a fear of consuming that because of the misinformation about it being inflammatory, that's who I'm trying to reach. Those are the people who I don't want to be fearful of those very valid food sources, nutrient sources. And remember, just as I was talking about earlier, like dairy has different varying amounts of that main carbohydrate, the lactose. And so if you have a lactose intolerance, if you have a deficiency in the lactase enzyme, there are so many dairy products that have the majority, if not all, of the lactose taken out. This is a lot of times where people who have a lactose intolerance are able to tolerate things like cheese, hard cheeses. And of course, with different kind of products, the fat amounts can vary too. And I found that to be very helpful. I love cottage cheese. And so sometimes when I'm in a really big like cottage cheese kick, I'll have a reduced fat or no fat, and then also a full fat one. And depending on the context, like if I need a quick snack before the gym, that is a time where I don't want to have a lot of fat because that takes longer to digest and I don't want to just feel it in my stomach. And so I would have the one with the lower fat and add some kind of carbohydrates to there to provide me with more of that energy for that movement. But if I'm looking for more of a satisfying, more of a filling kind of snack or as part of a meal, then I would have that full fat kind of option. And so there's just so much variety within dairy products that are very nutrient dense that can really fit within the context of what you need that meal or snack to do, all while providing so much nutrients. In my opinion, it can be coming from a place of privilege to fearmonger people away from dairy. Now, throughout the years, I've seen many people, some of the reasons why they don't consume dairy, it can be for a variety of reasons. One of them that it's not natural to consume it as like a human, like from another animal, or that it's not normal to drink like milk after infancy. And like we're the only species that consumes milk after infancy, which to that, I always like to share one of my favorite tweets ever. It's quoting someone like, we're the only species that drinks milk after infancy, dairy is bad for you. And then they say, we're also the only species that drinks peach, mango, pineapple, spirulina, kale smoothies, Karen. Let me eat my cheese in peace. Now let's move into some of the questions that I've gotten specifically around dairy. One of the concerns that someone might have is that it contains antibiotics in the milk that we're drinking. Now, cows can experience mastitis, so similar to humans, they might need to be on an antibiotic, just as humans might need to be on an antibiotic when they get mastitis. It doesn't happen all the time. It doesn't happen to every cow, just like it doesn't happen to everybody who is chest feeding. But in the case that a cow is on antibiotics for mastitis, the whole process around that, like they are separated, their milk is not used. There needs to be a withdrawal process, so it is not in the milk anymore. They have to be completely done with their full antibiotic run, or whatever it's called, the prescription, and there's stringent testing of that milk to be sure that it doesn't contain any antibiotics. If it does, that milk needs to be dumped. And a farmer who has a cow who needs antibiotics, they're not going to be able to use that milk. Like, it's a pump and dump kind of thing. And so ultimately, it doesn't do anything positive for the farmer short term. Like, it keeps it positive because if they don't get the antibiotics that they need, the cow could lose its life, right? Like, just like humans, sometimes we need antibiotics. But in the short term, having a cow on antibiotics, that doesn't really help. There's no incentive for a farmer to put their cow on antibiotics, because ultimately they're sending out less milk. Because when the amount of milk is being collected from the farm for use, it's tested. They test it before it goes into the trucks to like take it away. And all of that milk is combined together. And so if that farmer did not do their job, if they contaminate the rest of the milk that was fine, they have to eat the cost. There are so many like checks and balances for the end product to not consume or to not contain those harmful things, to not contain anything like antibiotics. Another question that sometimes people have is about the hormones in milk. So all milk, regardless of where it's coming from, contains some kind of hormones. And those hormones can be fat soluble, and so you can have a slightly higher amount in like a full fat kind of milk versus a no fat one, and organic having the same amount as like a conventional milk, but the overall amount of that is not significant, even in hormone sensitive kind of health issues or health concerns. For people who are assigned male at birth, there's typically, I've seen around like 6,000 times the amount of those hormones in human bodies. And for people who are assigned female at birth, who are not taking any kind of hormone replacement therapies or anything, naturally they're producing around 28,000 times the amount of hormones that would be in a glass of milk. So the difference between what the body produces versus what you're consuming, it's far too little to have any kind of like physiological effect. If drinking something like milk, if consuming milk could raise estrogen levels in like a significant kind of way, or hormone levels could change hormone levels in a significant way overall, then we would expect it to be part of the recommendations or like useful for treating symptoms in menopause, but it's not, because it's not significant enough. Some people are concerned about dairy and its effect on maybe early puberty. Also, no clear link between the consumption of dairy products and puberty. In fact, a lot of children are drinking less milk, and so it's kind of the opposite. If it really did cause an early puberty, we would see the opposite kind of thing happening as the intake of dairy has gone down. Now, again, I'm not telling you to go out and like run to your nearest grocery store and just like start drinking milk by the gallon. I am just here to help you to make informed choices and to not have fear around food, to be empowered around your food choices and not cave to nutrition misinformation and fear mongering. I don't drink dairy milk very often. In fact, I prefer almond milk or oat milk depending on what I'm consuming. Usually with my protein powders, I'll have almond milk. The protein powder is dairy, it's whey, which is the main protein source in dairy, but I like the lightness and the flavor of the almond milk that I use it with. And then I use a very specific kind of oat milk for my iced coffees. I'm the kind of person who gets used to one kind of food or beverage flavor, and I don't like a whole lot of change. Like, I like to explore different foods and stuff when I'm in the mood for it, but I can just kind of get in a rut of having like the same thing over and over again because I enjoy it so much. And I'll just have it over and over again until I get tired of it. But that's kind of a side rant. But I don't consume a lot of dairy milk, but the kind of dairy that I do consume on a regular basis would include cheese and also cottage cheese, yogurt. Those are the top 3 sources that I get, and I really appreciate the amount of not just the flavor, but the nutrient profile that it helps me with. And when I was pregnant, I was actually like craving whole milk like almost the entire time. I was consuming so much milk. And I do think that played a big role in my pregnancy nourishment because I wasn't able to really consume a whole lot outside of that. Like for a lot of time, my appetite was pretty low because my stomach just felt so smushed. And so like seeing how much whole milk really did help me throughout that time, and how other kind of dairy products helped me even, since then, and just in general for my whole life. Like I am so appreciative that dairy is something that is an option and something that is very nutrient dense and tasty. And as I was saying, like I am not against any kind of like plant milks. I consume almond and oat milk on a regular basis, but they are just not nutritionally equivalent. The amount of protein, carbohydrates, vitamins, minerals, things in there, it is not equivalent. It like taste wise, oat milk can come a little bit close to it. A lot of people think that. I think it tastes pretty close to oat milk. Depends on the brand, but regardless of taste, the nutritional profile, they're not equivalent, which again doesn't make them bad, but it's just approaching food with curiosity, compassion, and context, and making choices that are best for you in that moment and for your overall health needs. And I will also say this has not been sponsored by the Dairy Council or anything like that. I'm not being paid by like Big Dairy to put this video out or anything. All right, that wraps it up for this video. Please leave a like if you liked it. Make sure you're subscribed. I would greatly appreciate that. And remember, you can strive for health without subscribing to diet culture. I'll see you later. Bye.